sometimes it's better for me to just sit back, bite my tongue, and then in 4 years I'll be able to say what I want.
There has been a gradual institutionalization of this code of conduct, the effect of which is to prevent people from ventilating their views. Bright students won't put up with it.
Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith.
They stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber at Yale.
We disagree, we debate, and then at the end of the day, we remain friends.
Check out the Buckley Institute's fall lineup. We have a debate in late September on whether global order needs U.S. power. In October, come listen to legal experts review the biggest Supreme Court rulings of the spring term. Plus, kick off the fall semester by joining the Buckley Institute in the United States Postal Service in Beinecke Plaza on Tuesday, September 9th for the official unveiling of the William F. Buckley Jr. Centennial Stamp. Check out our website, buckleyinstitute.com, for more info. Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of Pod and Man at Yale of the 2025-2026 academic year. I'd like to welcome back Hilda Barragan-Reyes.
Hey, great to be here.
William Flanigan.
Hello, good to be back on.
And first-time guest Stephen Morris.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
All of them are Lux et Veritas Leadership Fellows with the Buckley Institute this year. Thanks for joining us. What we're going to talk about today is free markets and capitalism. I want to know what you guys think about capitalism, what your peers at Yale think about capitalism, what your professors feel about it, and like what just the general vibe is about free markets and capitalism. So where do you guys feel about, like, where are you guys on this? What do you feel about it? It can be just a gut check. It doesn't need to be a Nobel Prize lecture. Hilda, do you want to start us off?
Of course. Well, I think history has proven that capitalism is the best system to turn scarcity into abundance. And we've seen this repeatedly in different variations across countries all over the globe. I'm an economics major, so I've seen a lot of interesting theories as to what causes wealth and what generates prosperity in a country. And there was this professor that was incredibly famous at Yale, Simon Kuznets, and he has this hypothesis about the U-curve. And what the U-curve says is that at the beginning of a society that is agrarian, there is almost no inequality because most people live in poverty. But once a society starts to industrialize, then you see inequality steadily rise. But as an economy shifts to a service sector industry, then you see inequality drop. However, this hypothesis has never really been proven, but I feel like this is the general vibe at the Yale economics department. What do you guys think?
William?
Well, I am no expert on the Yale economics department, having taken just one class, which was introductory microeconomics. But certainly it is the case that empirical evidence in the field of economics points towards free markets as the solution to many of our problems. And that is the position of most of the Yale faculty that I know of and many of the students of economics. I think that I think what perhaps is more interesting than the feelings of the faculty and students of economics, though, is the feelings and expressions of other students that maybe are not so educated as on the topic of economics, but still express very strong views about this topic.
I'm also very much in favor of capitalism. I think it's the best way of creating as much wealth and resources within a society while also giving people the most freedom to choose what they want to do with their lives. And this combination of abundance and giving people choices is what drew me to the theory. I'm a political science major, and I've taken several classes in that area and in political philosophy. And from the classes that I've taken, there seems to be a wide range of views in my classes and discussions. Some people are hardcore socialists all the way to libertarians or anarchists. And some view markets either as a necessary evil or something that we should probably avoid because it's driven by greed or other bad impulses, while other people tend to agree more like me that markets are a great way of allocating resources, or others think that even if markets tend to be good, the government should still play a heavy role in improving them to their extent.
So there's a perception that young people are, just all running around advocating for socialist revolutions. We got someone who's an economics major, someone who's taken a handful of courses in economics, and someone who's taken one course in economics. And you all seem to be on board with capitalism. Do you guys think you're like counterculture, so to speak, on campus? Are you guys different, or is the perception wrong?
I think...
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Hilda, why don't you start us off again then?
I think people don't necessarily disagree with the premise that capitalism is the best system. I think they often don't understand what capitalism is and what socialism is. And I think it's very important. This is why I encourage my friends to take economics classes so they understand the basics.
Hilda encouraged me to take my economics. It's true.
And I think people that support, socialist economic policies have very valid concerns about the system. There is a general tendency to concentrate wealth and abundance at the top levels of society, and it is true that over time wages have rewarded higher earners and people with top level executive jobs a lot more than, say, the janitor or the garbage man. And I think there are some serious questions about affordability that have been asked across the country. And sure, we're better off than we have been in the past, but these are issues that need to be addressed.
So, Stephen, you said you've been in class with other socialists or people with a wide spectrum of economic beliefs or beliefs about the economic system. Is the perception that, college students are a bunch of, flag-waving Marxists? Is that overwrought?
I think that's exaggerated, but I do think there's a lot more people that lean more towards economic interventionism than towards unfettered capitalism. But I think the perception that college students are largely socialists is exaggerated. I think the majority of opinion is probably capitalism with some government intervention to fix some of its problems, as Hilda mentioned.
Is that kind of like the vibe on campus? We talk about at Buckley in particular, like an orthodoxy on campus, which is like the range of perspectives you can share without without worrying about social isolation or ostracism. It's like, what is, I guess, William, you want to take this one? What is kind of like the orthodox campus opinion on socialism versus capitalism?
Well, I think there's kind of two things at play there. The first is that generally the campus orthodoxy is on the left, and so ideas of socialism are widespread and are not going to get you in trouble, at least among your peers at Yale. But then there's also the element of the fact that the Yale student body in general is very wealthy compared to America at large, and so there's a kind of this undertone there of the fact that the people at this school are the ones that have largely benefited from capitalism, and we are in an institution that's beautiful and well funded, and we have wonderful professors here, all made possible through capitalism. So I think that there's a little bit of a tension there within the campus orthodoxy where it doesn't land exactly on one side or the other. I mean, you look at the percentage of people at this school that go on to banking and consulting and roles that are shamelessly corporate, which is not bad.
Shamelessly corporate.
It's not bad, but it is in tension with the campus orthodoxy of what people will tell you versus what in aggregate they actually do.
There's this phenomenon I've heard about where you've got the handful of campus socialists or whatever percentage of campus socialists who end up on Wall Street anyway. Do you guys see that? Do you interact with people who are big socialists and you're going to be at Goldman Sachs in 4 years?
Yeah, well, certainly I've met some people who in their debating societies in public, they say they're socialists, but then end up working for a consulting firm or investment banking. And a lot of people at Yale do want to go into these really high-paying fields. And even if their economic beliefs seem to be in tension, sometimes people just don't care enough about politics and economics to really put those ideas at the center of what they want instead of what they want to do or make money.
Well, and I think some people justify this by saying, once I start working at my corporate job, I'm going to give more to charity. I'm going to raise my children to think that socialist policies are the best way to go.
But do they?
But they never really act on it.
And also, if you go get a higher paying job for the purpose of giving money to other people, that is literally how capitalism works, right? You work hard and do what you want with the money you have. Do you guys find that, when you do come across those cases, however common or rare that they are, do you think they're socialist now because it's socially acceptable or edgy? But they really always just plan on going to some good corporate job? Or are they actually socialists and then are just being practical about it in a capitalistic society?
Well, I think when you think about the Yale student body, what you have to understand is Yale is somewhat unique as an institution in that it confers to its students a great deal of status at a high cost, high financial cost, high cost of working very hard in high school. And in doing so, it kind of self-selects people that are concerned about what people think about them and what their kind of status is in society. And I certainly am that way too, I'll admit.
At least he's honest.
I think that it does. I think that when you look at this tension with the campus orthodoxy, when you look at these kind of inconsistencies that you mentioned, that is kind of the lens through which I see it that kind of makes it make sense, which is to say that people support socialism vocally because they want to be perceived as caring and doing well by the working class through the systems that have the most direct, that signal that most directly and most efficiently. At the same time, they want to make a lot of money and be seen as very effective and hardworking. And so I think that is a big part of that kind of tension.
Do you think, which do you think is the real them in that case?
That is a good, I couldn't tell you the answer to that. It probably varies by person. I think the best way probably to tell would be, what do people actually go do? Do you actually go work for a nonprofit where you're not making much money? Or are you going to signal these socialist ideas while you're here, but then go on to do something that is capitalistic?
So where do you think the bulk of the campus is? If you're going to do a bell curve, what is the largest distribution, if you had to just guess, of where people are on capitalism versus socialism, right?
I would say that the large majority of campus is pro-capitalism over socialism. I want to believe that it's 70% of the campus. I might be wrong. You two can jump in on that. But I think a lot of it just comes from a certain level of guilt you feel with however successful you've been. And I feel like people just reconcile that by saying, I'm successful because I had a certain upbringing or I had access to certain resources, and that is not fair. And some people didn't have access to that. So therefore, in order to kind of mask that level of success, I'm willing to say that socialist policies are better, because why would I not want to be nice?
Do you think your average student who's yes, capitalism is good, okay, maybe a little government regulation, but I'm not apologizing for capitalism, to Hilda's point, are they more no, I got here on my own merit, I did my own work, versus the ones who are more government interventionalists might take more of the perspective that Hilda raised, that maybe they feel a little guilty about their success?
I do think many people have a sense of guilt in that there's a lot of factors beyond our control that affect how we got into Yale or what careers our parents had. And I think part of the instinct towards socialism or towards interventionist policies in the economy is seeking either to rectify that or to rectify the guilt that people have about that. I can say that if you're taking advantage of these opportunities, you feel less bad about it if you're saying that you're seeking to improve it for everyone else.
William?
I think you're exactly right, Stephen. I think, and I would say that it has to do with what I was talking about before with signaling too, where people don't want to be perceived as, oh, you just got into Yale because your parents were rich. The reality is that many people, including, I'll never be able to know, but my parents have provided a good life for me. I've had a family with two parents, and who's to say that I would be here if I didn't? And so people don't want to be perceived as being here for reasons other than their own merit, and they feel the need to kind of mask that in the beliefs and ideas that they propagate. And so I think there is kind of an ulterior motive for that.
So how about you guys? I'm going to start to put you on the spot, make you get a little serious here, but do you guys feel guilty about being at Yale?
Well, I wouldn't say guilty, but there's a lot of factors beyond my control that allowed me to get here. I'm the child of two academics. I grew up in a family with two parents in a good neighborhood, and my parents offered me a lot of opportunities and attention, and a lot of people in this country don't have that opportunity. All the people pretty much that I know at Yale are incredibly smart, but there's countless other people just like us that wouldn't have gotten here if they hadn't had the same opportunities as I or other people did. Right.
And to be clear, I don't think anyone should hear this. And I'm not asking you to say why you're better than everyone else. That was just a question of as much as guilt is a motivator for your politics and guilt at your particular situation, getting into Yale, which is a fantastic school. I was just kind of wanted to explore your own thoughts on that. William, you want to?
Well, I think I would just say that, I think that, really and truly, I do feel a little bit of guilt for being at Yale, and I really think that probably everyone should, because it's not a strictly meritocratic system, and being young people, the circumstances that you're born into, which is literally a lottery, does play into the opportunities you have. But what I would urge people is not to respond to that by feeling the need to signal through politics or through anything else some degree of compensation for that, but rather to think about, what can I do to repay the society that's given me the opportunity to come to such a beautiful place despite things that may be out of my control. And I think that the best way of doing that is to better yourself, to take advantage of the opportunities that you have here, and to look at things like the free markets and say, well, this is the empirical best way to improve people's lives. And I have a responsibility as someone that is here to do what I can to advance this country in that way.
Speaking to your point where you talked about how you can either approach your time at Yale and say, okay, I feel guilty about all the unearned, steps up I got to get here. And then say, well, that's why I support socialism, because it's unfair, not entirely meritocratic society. And take the other perspective and say, like, well, I got here. It's, I acknowledge that capitalism is good, and it's, I'm going to make the most of that, and then try and, give back through society by acknowledging that reality. Do you think would you argue that there's kind of an obligation, a societal obligation for students at Yale to, push the benefits of capitalism or support the benefits of capitalism rather than, defaulting to socialism? Stephen?
Part of what we should do is not simply be reactionary against the system that has given us these benefits, but be grateful towards it. It's because of capitalism, because of living in unprecedentedly wealthy country like the United States, that I have these opportunities to go to Yale to learn about all of these things. And we don't have an obligation to tear it down, but we have an obligation to maintain the system so that other people could have the same chances as we do, and to make sure that the system that has allowed at least some of us to thrive will keep allowing that in the future.
And I definitely agree with that. I think the community benefits a lot from capitalism because the pursuit of capitalism is what leads to the creation of businesses that then offer more jobs that are perhaps better paying and that lead to, a lot of innovation that can improve the lives of people from all kinds of social classes.
So how about in class, right? How about your professors is really what I'm asking. I think Hilda might have mentioned or talked to, or William was talking about the faculty. Where, in general sense about economics, I guess we'll start with Hilda because she's an economics major. Where are the faculty on this question?
I think the faculty at Yale are very focused on the question of economic development. How is it that we can help other countries improve their economic situation and the welfare of their citizens? And the solutions that they're proposing are within the capitalist framework. But it is the economics department, so I guess that's expected.
So, Stephen, you mentioned a little bit in your political philosophy classes that economics has come up. What's the vibe among the faculty there?
Yeah, so I'd say it does depend on the faculty member, on the class. The political philosophy class that I took last semester was, I think, quite fair in representing a bunch of different political persuasions from all the way from Marx to Robert Nozick and Adam Smith. And having discussions within our TA sections allowed us to moderate different aspects of it. I think in terms of other classes beyond the political philosophy ones where the professors have studied all these different perspectives, there is somewhat of an assumption that if there's a general problem with society, then it is the role of government to solve it. The interventionist framework within capitalism, but I haven't experienced teachers that are openly saying that the capitalist system is the inherent problem in itself as opposed to solutions within it.
We had a debate, Buckley had a debate in the fall on the value of merit in hiring and in education. And one of the professors who was part of that debate, Daniel Markovitz, who's a Yale law professor, he spent a lot of time talking about how far left he was, and he was both proud of it and openly conceded it. And he made the argument, because intellectual diversity on campus came up, he made the argument that there's a consensus among Yale faculty when it comes to capitalism, to kind of you guys mentioned, it's center left. Is that where the bulk of economics faculty, philosophy faculty, general faculty are?
Well, it's certainly not interventionist. I'll say that.
Well, I've had some professors in the past that have been focused on debunking a lot of social ideas regarding discrimination and its prevalence in society. And so I would say that that is a bit more right than left economics.
So Yale is one of the top universities. A lot of people come out of Yale, go into Congress, into being policymakers in law. You guys graduate Yale. So the day after you graduate, you become, I don't know, mayor of New York, for example. What kind of policies do you think you would push forward?
I think, present day New York City mayor candidates.
For example?
Like Mamdani.
Hypothetically.
Mamdani, I think, has good and bad economic policy ideas. I think one good one is his take on social business regulation in New York City. He does say that small businesses have to jump through a lot of regulatory hoops to get their places started. And I do think those should be reduced in order for the number of them to go up and the number of jobs to go up as well. I know, Stephen, you're from New York City, so you might have a bit more ability to speak to this, so please go ahead.
Yes, I think in general, my approach to New York City economic policies would be very different than mayoral candidate Mamdani, who actually is a socialist, unlike other mayors that we've had in the past, wants city-owned businesses such as grocery stores and housing, and wants even more regulation in other places in the economy. I would do the exact opposite. I would deregulate much of the economic businesses in the city, the housing stock, to allow people to have more jobs, more houses. And he's responding to real concerns such as those about affordability, which are really hurting the city. But I fear that his solutions are going to make the problem worse, not better.
William?
Well, I think Donald Trump likes to say, drill, baby, drill. If I was mayor of New York, we'd be instituting build, baby, build, because the problem they've got down there is not enough housing, zoning over-regulation. They need to be building as much housing as possible. They want the government to do it, people like Zohran. But really, it's the reason it's not happening is not, rents as high as they are. It is profitable to build housing in New York City. It's just the government blocks you. And then they say, oh, why are rents rising? I mean, it's just ridiculous. I think that the problem they have is as Hilda points out, Zohran realizes on certain issues is overregulation, but I think they have overregulation across the board. And they would see that it would become a lot more affordable for everyone if they would allow the free market to do more to create housing and create jobs.
So when people talk about candidates like Zohran Mamdani, people talk about Bernie Sanders, right, especially in the 2015, 2016 campaign he had, they point to a lot of support among the young. Like maybe it's just media hyped and like I think the actual voting for Zohran Mamdani, like it was much more disparate between more established communities, younger communities. But where do you think this kind of young support for this, I guess, socialist alternative take comes from? How about you, William? You want to finish this off?
Sure. I mean, I think that a lot of young people do feel a degree of apathy towards our politics. And when you're looking at a slate of candidates that includes a former governor who's arguably a Nepo baby, someone that is facing corruption charges, and then you have this youthful young person that is not afraid to say things that are controversial and is not afraid to kind of take an axe to things. I do think that has an appeal to people. Maybe that's not actually their best interest, but I do think it has an appeal in particular for young people.
It's almost Trumpian in a way.
Exactly. He is.
All right. Well, Hilda, Stephen, William, thanks so much for joining us in the first episode of Pod and Man at Yale. We'll now turn to our expert interview with Georgetown University's Jason Brennan on why young people seem to love socialism. I'd like to welcome Dr. Jason Brennan. Jason Brennan is a Robert J. and Elizabeth Flanigan Family Professor of Strategy, Economics, Ethics, and Public Policy at the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University. He's the author of 18 books, the editor-in-chief of Philosophy and Public Affairs, and an associate editor of Social Philosophy and Policy. Thanks so much for joining us on Pod and Man at Yale.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you're here to talk to our Lux et Veritas leadership program about free enterprise, which seems to be somewhat unpopular opinion on campus these days, especially among the younger demographic. Buckley, we've surveyed college students nationally for a number of years. The last 3 years, we've asked about whether college students would prefer to live under socialism or capitalism. The past year, capitalism edged out socialism for the first time in the 3 years we've asked the question. 36% of students would rather live under capitalism, a close 34% socialism. Why is it even close?
Yeah, partly it's, I think, a question about definition and how people understand these questions. Because I've seen similar kinds of surveys where you'll ask people for like capitalism versus socialism, and they'll say socialism, and then you'll ask follow-up questions where you define the terms more. And when you put more fine-grained questions on, you'll often find people who will say they're socialist, but they're not really what we would consider socialist. They're a kind of capitalist. They just want more regulation or more redistribution. So I think it's socialism is a nicer sounding word, but then when you give them the definition, they tend not to actually be socialist. Also, like when you say to people, well, even by socialism, what do you mean? And they'll do the Bernie Sanders thing. They'll be like, Denmark. And then, the Danish prime minister says, well, we're a capitalist country. Right. So I think they usually just mean capitalism, but with a certain level of regulation and redistribution, not genuine socialism.
When people talk about socialism, they often think like Denmark or Sweden, which are capitalist countries with government regulation. And I'm sure if you did a side by side with America and these countries, there are places where they're less regulated and places where more, and vice versa. And you look at the real socialist countries, or the countries, communist, socialist that you really think of, Cuba, Soviet Union, the closest to those. The only ones that still exist as socialist entities are ones that have very successful private enterprises. So if you kind of look at the way socialism has progressed, I mean, that it hasn't really. So why do people still have this attraction to socialism?
The Fraser Institute every year comes up with an index of ranking countries by how capitalist or non-capitalist they are. You're right. What you find is that many of the countries that Americans are inclined to call socialist are actually more free market overall than the United States is. And many of them that we're inclined to call socialist that maybe are less overall are nevertheless more free market on certain things. Like they might be stronger in their protection of private property or stronger in the protection of free trade, but also have maybe more government redistribution. Nevertheless, I think socialism continues to have this kind of appeal because it has a moral power to it that capitalism doesn't seem to have. A very common view is that capitalism is a system that takes greed and other base human motivations and turns them into something that's publicly beneficial. And you get this from the capitalists themselves. Your typical economics textbook will say something like, a good set of institutions aligns self-interest with the public interest. It gives you a stake in doing what's beneficial to other people. In a capitalist economy, we are providing goods and services to one another is not from love or kindness or civic identity or fellow feeling. It's greed. I want something from others, so I make myself useful to them to get what I want. It's fundamentally a greed-based economy. And socialism, its biggest promise is something like, think about kibbutzim, or think about like a family. Like, despite being this radical free market advocate, I live in a commune in a way. Like I have a commune of four.
It's true.
Yeah, like 4 people and a dog, right? It's not a perfectly equal commune. The 2 older people have a lot more power than the 2 younger people, but nevertheless, like things are freely shared. It's not like every time a kid wants to like use some ketchup or something out of the fridge, I'm like, that'll be 3 cents. Or if my wife is like, Jay, can I have a foot rub? It's like, okay, but that'll be $5. Like you just do it, right? Because it's the thing to do. And I think it's a very common idea to say, wouldn't it be nice if the entire world could be like that?
So do you think, I guess from your perspective, and like this is interesting because I've like never quite attacked the question in this way, right? The way you're presenting it, it seems like the people who want socialism don't really want socialism. Maybe the vision of socialism they want isn't that far from the capitalism that we're used to. Is that your kind of understanding about how college students or people in the street see it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's probably the kind of case where like for every 30 people that say they want socialism, if I really were to interview them, I bet maybe like only about 5 out of them, so about 6, they're like genuinely what I would call socialist. And the others are probably advocating just more government intervention or more redistribution or something else. In part because people use these terms in very confused ways. And frankly, it's not special to this debate. I mean, my main research area is voter behavior. And it's surprisingly common how often people don't know the words they're using. Like just to give you an example from the year 2000, the American National Election Studies does a survey of voters and asks them questions such as, who's more conservative, Bill Clinton or George Bush George Bush II, right? And only something like about 58% or so of the voters were able to identify that Bush was the more conservative candidate. But then they asked these follow-up questions like about abortion rights, women's rights, environmental policy, welfare policy, tax policy, and so on. They asked these same questions and most of the people couldn't get the questions right. So they knew there was this word conservative, and they knew that that word was supposed to attach more to one person than the other, but they couldn't elaborate on what that word means. And that is not a fluke. That's the most common thing. You'd be surprised at how few people can actually identify these things. And you're like, well, I bet college students are special, right? They must know more. Often they don't. frankly, they often don't. You'd be surprised at how little they know about certain things that they talk a lot about. This actually is a real puzzle, by the way, in surveying people. What do they actually believe? Because if you ask them one question, they say one thing. You ask them a similar question, slightly differently worded with a synonym or an elaboration, they say the opposite thing. What's the actual question that captures their opinion? The answer is we don't really know.
So I guess if you're kind of, like taking this to a point, are you concerned by the young socialist movement?
Yeah, I think it is concerning, though. Frankly, young people don't vote that much, so that helps. And by the time they do vote, they often have a mortgage and pay taxes and like start thinking in very simplistic terms. Like a lot of what college students think is childish because they haven't had to really do much. But what I'm maybe more worried about is like it's not just that, but in itself, it's that in combination with what's happening on the right. Because it used to be for a long time in the U.S., you had kind of like, Republicans were like free market people and Democrats were the more interventionist people, even if they were not socialist per se. But nevertheless, there was still kind of an agreement on fundamentally we're going to have a market economy. We're not the Soviet Union. We're not going to be a proxy for the Soviet Union. We're just talking about how much regulation, how much intervention, how much taxation. And so it's a question of on the Fraser scale of economic freedom, do we want to be like a 7.5 or a 9.5 or somewhere in between? And the debate really between Republicans and Democrats is like 8.5 versus an 8 on that scale, where 10 is perfectly free market and 0 is like perfectly Soviet Union. What I'm worried about, though, is like now on the right, what you have is a very much an anti-market mentality. Suddenly trade is bad. You have a rise of like post-liberal thinkers who defend communitarian type views and regard markets and capitalism with deep levels of suspicion. And things that you were hearing people on the left say 10 years ago, you hear people on the right say, and that is rising in popularity. So you've almost got like an intellectual pincer movement where like the far right and the far left are very anti-market and very anti-free enterprise. And then the people that are adjacent to them are, considering those things pretty seriously. And it's almost like the people in the center are still in favor of fundamentally of market-based economies, but they're pretty milquetoast about it, as moderates often are.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
To be moderate is necessarily to not be definitive about anything.
Yeah, that's right. Very few moderates. This has been true for the entire time that political psychologists have been studying and political science have been studying voter behavior. Moderates are rarely strongly moderate. It's almost like there's really like I'm strongly ideologically committed to moderation because I think moderation works. It's usually just like they don't think that much about it and they're wishy-washy.
Right.
But the motivated people, you've got this kind of odd horseshoe effect where like what you hear on the far left and what you hear on the far right about markets are very, very similar. And if those two groups are really strong, they can cooperate with another and get a lot of things done that can really mess up market economies. And part of the problem that happens too is like groups like this will get some power and make decisions. Those decisions will have bad ramifications for everybody, but people almost never blame the outcomes on the people who make those decisions. No matter how much it messes up, they just advocate having more and more interventions to fix what the mistake that was made in the first place. It's rare for people to say, yeah, that rule didn't work, let's roll it back. The year 2020 and even before then, frankly, but like especially after during the pandemic, the U.S. government spent a lot of money. Governments around the world spent a lot of money. They restricted supply because of like how COVID works. And all of a sudden our money is worth less and there's massive inflation. And people are like, who could have predicted that? Well, people were saying it was going to happen. It did exactly as they said, right? But instead of going, wow, the government really messed up spending all this extra money when we have a supply shock, like giving people extra money and spending extra money when there's a supply shock. No, just as economics would predict, there's our money's worth less now. No, they blame capitalism and say we just need to like have a radical solution.
So it's actually interesting. There was actually a Wall Street Journal op-ed, I think either today or yesterday. I read it today by a guy named Brian Albrecht. I don't even remember who he was from, but he basically made the point you just made. So like basic economics bears out, right?
Yeah.
It's complicating factors like sometimes, but like when you trace it, like you restrict supply, costs go up. I think that he talked about the egg issue.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you solve the egg problem? We're like, where did the egg price problem come from? Avian flu outbreak, supply side issue, increased supply, prices come down.
Right.
But it seems that, what I've always found about tariffs in particular, because, tariffs is kind of one of those issues you talked about where the left and the right have come together. And some of the arguments made are, it'll increase costs, but it's worth it. But you're right. When it comes to the political discussion, it's never, this is worth it. I mean, there was a bit of that in Trump 1. It said like, okay, it's worth it. We're going to do this. But why isn't that argument the one prosecuted? Why is it, no, it's this other problem and we have to address that do more regulation.
Yeah.
Rather than just acknowledging that this was a cost that we're willing to accept.
I think it's fundamentally like, there are smart people. For every ideology, there are smart people who defend that ideology in a smart way. Most of the people who support it are dumb people who support it in a dumb way. And that includes, by the way, all the people who agree with me, so it's not special to us. But generally speaking, like actual day-to-day politics is quite dumb. And it's that way because of perverse incentives. I remember I was in 2010, I was in Australia during their federal election. And I remember watching the advertisements that the parties were putting on. And I think it was the Liberal Party had this advertisement that said, or advertisement for Australian viewers. They had this advertisement that went something like, the Green Party is proposing this policy. And to be honest, it's a pretty good idea, but we don't have evidence for it yet, and we should wait until the evidence comes in before we put in that policy. What a reasonable thing to say. I've never seen an ad like that in the United States, but it didn't work, and they got trounced. Like, they were not rewarded for talking in a rational way. They were punished for it. And the reason for that is something that's endemic to democracy, built into the incentive structure of it. This is the stuff that I spend most of my time on. Imagine, for the sake of argument, you're in a college level class, like a really big class, and the professor comes in on the first day and says, 15 weeks from now, you're going to have a final exam that's worth 100% of your grade. But because I'm an egalitarian, I'm not going to give each of you your individual scores. Instead, you're all getting exactly the same grade. I'm going to average everyone's final exam together, and you're all getting that grade. You'd expect that students, if they'd probably protest it, but if imagine they couldn't protest, they couldn't get rid of it. They're stuck in this class, and this is the rule. You'd expect the average grade to be really bad. And they fail because of perverse incentives, because they no longer have an incentive to be informed or to think carefully about it. If I work really hard, like if the average grade's a 30 and I work really hard and I score 100 on the final, I think I bump it up from a 30 to like a 30.7. And so that dynamic affects everybody. So now we're liberated from being knowledgeable. We have perverse incentives. We're rationally ignorant. We don't learn what's in the class because the incentives, the cost of learning is higher than the benefits. But even worse than that, what can happen with politics is you now are liberated to use politics for things other than being about policy. And that's what you tend to see. People, they don't really think that carefully about policy. And a lot of times, even when they say they advocate things, they don't really mean it. It's more about supporting the party. And you can see this with a bunch of different experiments that show this. One is you can go up to people and say, hey, what party do you belong to? And they tell you, and then you hand them the platform for the other party, but lie to them and tell them it's their platform and ask them to defend it. And they will. And then when you tell them, I lied, it's actually, you said you're a Democrat, that's actually the Republican platform, they won't believe you. So you see things like, rather than it being like people form an ideology and then pick the party that matches it, for most American voters and for most voters around the world, it's more likely that you form a party affiliation and then you just support whatever that party says. Mm-hmm. So it's not really surprising that the arguments that work, the rhetoric that works is dumb, because politics is designed to incentivize dumb.
Right. So
more dumb.
So I guess I want to, before we kind of get into the free markets thing, I want to talk about one policy that, has taken a little bit of news, and that's Zohran Mamdani is a self-described socialist, won the Democratic primary in New York City, effectively, making him mayor come the next election. His big policy they talked about is government-run grocery stores. Economists pointed out, and several people have, when they were, investigating grocery stores for price gouging, said that, grocery stores have a very low margin of profit in the first place.
Yeah.
But, still the idea seems, in theory, practical, lower costs, because the government wouldn't that result in lower costs for groceries. So would that work?
Yeah, I think if you're like, I love the DMV, I wish the DMV were my grocery store, you're in for a treat. Gosh, you're going to love it. If you love going through the TSA and think, man, I wish this were a grocery store, you're in for a treat. It would be sure surprising if it worked, because whenever people have tried this, it's always failed, and it's failed for the same reasons. It fails because of not having the right kind of incentives. You're going to have to do something to ration out the food, because they're like, well, the profit motive is so evil, but the profit motive actually gets people to act. People are, frankly, they're just not that altruistic. They like to claim they are, and they like to claim that they have all these beliefs and would be willing to do things, but they're not. And you can test it for yourself. Like, if you have 2 kidneys, you're almost certainly a self-interested person, right? And people don't act upon these things, right? So they seem to think there's this reserve army of angels that are going to make these stores work, when it doesn't work anywhere else. So why would it work here? Frankly, I don't live in New York City, so I hope he does it, and that way I can use it as an example in future classes. You know, but I got to say, like, I have a kid applying for colleges right now, and like the fact that this person might become mayor is a reason to be like, you know, maybe say to my son, maybe you don't apply to like Columbia and NYU. Just wait and see.
Sure.
You know?
So you mentioned at the beginning that some of the appeal for socialism is kind of that mismatch between, you know, what people want or hope is possible out of the world, and, you know, the assessment of the world and how people are that capitalism is based on.
There's this really cool book that came out in 2008 called Why Not Socialism? It was written by the Marxist philosopher Jerry Cohen, that was trying to argue that deep down everyone's a socialist and they only put up with capitalism because they think they have to. And he goes through this whole thought experiment of, at first he asks you to imagine like what he calls like socialist camping trip, sharing everything. All the chores are shared equally. All the benefits of things are shared equally. All the goods are sort of shared equally. No one takes advantage of anything because they're all perfectly moral. So they're not going to free ride and it's just all working on love and happiness and kindness. And then he says, now imagine it's a capitalist camping trip, and they start like selling things and withholding their talents unless they get paid more. And he's like, would you rather go on the socialist camping trip or the capitalist camping trip? And everyone says the socialist camping trip. So he's like, aha, so wouldn't it be great if the whole world could run like that? Now, he actually admits more or less that we're going to have to be capitalist. It's not clear we can make any form of large-scale socialism work. But the problem fundamentally is not socialism, it's people. Mm-hmm. Socialism is good and people are bad. Capitalism is bad and people are bad. So capitalism is a system that works with bad people like us, and socialism demands more of us than we're willing to give. So that's why it fails, because of our flaw. What I would point out to people, and I actually wrote a book responding to it called Why Not Capitalism? The argument literally begins on the cover. Like his book has a picture of one sickly looking rose kind of growing out of the ground. And my book has the same as a parody of that picture, but many healthy, beautiful roses. We even at one point experimented with changing the colors. Like he uses revolutionary Marxist colors, red and black, and I made mine gold and black, but it didn't look good. So we went back to red and black. But that actually means something for the book. What I noticed, even back before he died, I noticed what he was doing was something like this. He was like, I want you to imagine socialism plus angels and compare that. Like by angels, I mean just morally flawless people.
Perfect humans.
Yeah, not no superpowers, but I take everyone's morality meter and turn it up to 10 and compare that to capitalism with realistic people. Which is better? Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, I think socialism with angels sounds better than capitalism with real people. Cool. What's doing the work? Is it the capitalism versus socialism, or is it the morality meter? Because he agrees, by the way, capitalism plus real people works better than socialism with real people. Right. But he's like, but then, you know, socialism plus angels beats capitalism plus real people, which beats socialism plus real people. Right. But the missing thing here in this with these two variables is, what about capitalism with angelic real people, like angelic perfect people? Right. And I emailed him about this back in the day and asked him that, and he was like, yeah, that's a good point. I didn't make the comparison, but I'm not even sure what capitalism with angels would be like. Why would they have these institutions? Yeah. And then I was watching, I think it was like around 2011 or 12 or so. It must have been 2012. I had my younger son was like 1.5 at the time. He's watching the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse TV show. And I'm like, there it is. It's capitalist utopia. Like Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, and all these other characters live together in a village. They don't have an official name. I just call it the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse Village. And they're abiding by all the principles that like Cohen want them to, but they're buying and selling and trading. They have private property in the means of production. It also has none of the moral failings, and they all have all the pro-social motivations that they're supposed to have. And so I ended up writing that book, Why Not Capitalism, to say, as almost a parody of his book, but to say, actually, this is giving us kind of an analogy of like what would be utopian capitalism if people were perfect. And I think it works. I won't go into all the details, but I think what that it shows is like, yes, you can imagine capitalism with angels. And so a lot of times when people are, and without getting into details of that, I think a lot of times when people are saying they like socialism, what they actually mean is, I wish people were more altruistic. I wish they cared more about one another. I wish they were less willing to free ride and more willing to do their part. I wish they were more concerned about the greater good. Right.
So it's interesting that interesting you phrase it that way, because I think a lot of people, when they hear other people talk about socialism, they think just of like, oh, I want free stuff. Yeah. And like what they don't realize, and I think this makes it harder to prosecute the argument for capitalism, like you said, is what they really need to be arguing or addressing is the aspirations about human nature that socialist supporters want. Not that I think that's practical, but if you're going to win the argument, you have to acknowledge like that's really what's kind of at heart there.
Yeah.
So what if you're one of the questions I wanted to ask you was like, you're talking to college students, they come across socialists in their college classes. They have professors who support it, students who support it. If they've got like 30, 45 seconds to stand up and say like, this is why I support capitalism, this is why it works. One, why should they? And like, what is their quick pitch?
Yeah. I mean, 30 seconds is short, but I think I would say something like this. In the 20th century, we experimented with two fundamental ways of living. About 90 countries went capitalist and about 90 countries went socialist. Capitalism went 90 for 90. Socialism went 0 for 90.
In what sense?
In the places that went capitalist, they all improved their standard of living, and their poor especially benefited. And the places that went socialist were hellholes, especially for the poor. Right. The practical argument is, if you know economics and you know some history, you can always win the practical argument, because you'll always have theory on your side. You'll always have the data on your side. Like the stuff that they're talking about, it doesn't work. At best, it comes down to like what kind of capitalism, just how much regulation, just how much redistribution. Like that's you're going to get to that point pretty quickly, and you always have to have a moral argument too, because people still see markets as fundamentally dirty. What
is that like?
Yeah, it's pitch? the pitch. I mean, at the end of the day, most of us, we want to trade with others, but we don't just want to trade with others to get something from them. We actually want to be of service to people. The engineer who designed the Zoom recording system that you're using, like, yeah, he wants money and he wants luxury and so on, but he also wants you to buy that product because it's a better product, all things considered, than the competitors. Like, they want that validation that comes from you even pursuing your self-interest. I think we fundamentally want to serve people and be served in turn, but we also want the recognition that what we're doing is genuinely valuable and it's not just being done as a favor. But most people, when they go to work, are like, they want to think, I made the world a better place by my productive activity. And frankly, most people do.
So I want to make one last question and I'll let you go. Is it important for students, or is it important for people in general to defend capitalism? Do they need to stand up and fight for it? Or, is it already a battle that's been won?
I think it is important to fight for it. In the long run, capitalism will win because of selection effects, basically, Darwinian selection. Like, if you have a bad social system, you die. Like, you don't reproduce very much, right? That's what happens. Like, if you want to survive, you need to have working institutions. So bad institutions collapse. So in the long run, the institutions that work are going to be the ones that tend to survive. But in the short run, we're living through it. Things that sound good tend to win over things that are good. And if someone says, we should just make this free, that sounds really good. Or, if we just had the right person in power, then they just had the ability to make whatever decision is needed, that would just fix things. That always sounds really good to people. You need people to get how the mechanism works. And it's, in a way, a lot of econ can be counterintuitive to people. It's just not their natural way of thinking. They need to start to learn to think about, like, when someone proposes a policy, you don't just think about the short-term effects on the most obvious immediate group. You have to think about the long-term effects on everybody. You have to think about people being strategic actors. And when you create a policy, they might not react to it the way that you want, right? They might game the system in various ways. And you have to be honest about what people are going to do. If you think that way, then it becomes natural to think that way to a certain point, and then you won't advocate insane policies. But most people around the world, it's just, this guy said he'd make this free, let's do it, right?
Well, appreciate you coming on Pod and Man at Yale. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
That wraps up the first episode of Pod and Man at Yale of the season. Give us a like and send us your thoughts at info@buckleyinstitute.com. And always remember, for God, for country, for Yale, in that order.